So, welcome back to the Mythical RC how-to series, and this is how to reassemble the Thunder Tiger TS4N after it's been stripped entirely, or almost entirely, for cleaning. If you've seen the previous videos, you'll have seen the state this car was in. It was absolutely filthy. So some things I have done since that last video are as follows. First of all, I've replaced the battery holder, so you've got a brand new battery holder here. I sell these on my eBay site, but they're only a couple of quid each, so that's not bad. I've also replaced the switch, the on-off switch, because I tested the old on-off switch and it didn't work, so that's now being replaced too. In addition, both servos have been tested and they have now been centered. With this particular car, centering is quite important, especially with the steering servo, because it can be quite difficult to get to. So we'll come back to those in a little while when we put the car together. Finally, the only other thing I've done is I've changed the receiver, simply because the receiver, if you remember, had a wire broken off it and looked very dirty, and it failed to work. So we've got a new receiver in there. So I'll put these pieces to one side and we'll crack on. Okay, lastly, the only other thing I've done just to update you is on the bottom of the chassis. The bottom of the chassis of this car was very scratched, so it's now been coated in a durable black paint. It's also heat resistant as well. I use matte black because it doesn't show up the marks so easily, but you could use anything you like. The top I'm leaving as its standard anodized aluminium, simply because although it looks like it's got scratches and dirt on it, by the time we've got the top components in place, it'll look absolutely fine, and a lot of that will be covered by those components. So from here, let's just run through very quickly what we've done. So we've cleaned the shock absorbers, front and rear. They've had a full clean. The engine has been cleaned and rebuilt, and you'll have seen that in another video, which I've also posted online. The front differential and the rear differential have all been cleaned, along with the central drive belt guide, if you like, has also been cleaned. Okay, all the screws are ready to go. The air filter has a new air filter filament in. I won't put any oil in that just yet. We'll wait until nearer to starting time, and then we'll go from there. So let's get started in putting the car together. So the first thing I'm going to do when putting this car together is we're going to put the back end in, only because it's very simple to put the back end in, and then following that we can put the engine in straight away. So this literally just mounts into place, and we've got 4 screws that are going to go into place to hold that in position. And I'm going to find them here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm going to use silver screws in this case because silver screws I think look nice on a black base, but you can easily use black screws if you wish. Incidentally, if you're short of screws and you ever need any screws, I found they're extremely difficult to buy, especially on eBay, because nobody seems to list RC screws. That is with one exception, and that exception is me, and simply because I couldn't find any, so I thought, well, in that case I'm going to try and source some myself, which I did. I found some in China. It took an awful long time to find what I was looking for, but I found some in China, and I've now split them up into packs, and I sell them on my eBay site as RC screws. So, and I've got both countersunk and pan head, and I'm just about to add, so by the time you watch this it may be there, some round Allen head screws as well. So you'll have all 4 types on there. Okay, so there we are. That's the back end in place, and we'll just do a quick turn, make sure that goes okay. And I can see, I don't know if you can see that, but I can see the drive shafts turning there, and obviously the drive belt's turning, and that's nice and free, so that's not bad at all. So the next thing we're going to do on this car is we're going to loosely mount the engine, and there is a reason for that, and that is because with this car it's a little bit more difficult to do. If we don't put the engine in first, you won't get it in position, because this top platform has to be inserted between the flywheel and the carburettor, and it sits like that. If this is in place, you won't get it in, and it's very difficult, and I've seen several people break this piece off by flexing it, trying to get it in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to briefly just put the engine in place, so it's held in place while we do the rest of the car. And then again, it's very simple. It doesn't need to be tight at this moment in time, it just needs to be loosely in position. So we're going to do that, and this particular engine has Allen key screws, so we're going to put the Allen key screws in place. 1, 2, 3, and if I can get my hands in there, which I can't, there we go. There's always one awkward one. There we go, 4. So let's just screw those down to a point where they're sitting quite happily. As I say, we don't need it tight for the moment, we just need it in position. There we are, tighten it off and then loosen it off by half a turn, which is where it needs to be. And that gives us the position that we need it to be in, ready to put the top platform in place. The top platform won't go in just yet, but that's the easy step. Before we put the top platform in, we've got to put the steering gear in and also the front suspension. The front suspension we'll do first, and there's a reason for that. It's because if you put the steering gear in and then the front suspension, you'll find you won't get the drive shaft, you won't get the drive belt over the front suspension. So you've actually got to put the front suspension in place and the central drive and then the steering so that it goes through the drive belts. There we are. So that's in place, that's the engine in place. It's a little bit loose, but that's absolutely fine for the time being. That's what we want, and we'll correct that later on in terms of where it needs to be. So the next thing to do then is put the front on, the front suspension if you like, or the front wishbone, and differential assembly. And once again, this is very simple. This is just 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to put it into position. I'll just make sure I don't catch the drive belt as we put it into position there, and I just need to find where I put my screws. Here we go, and 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just line up the holes. 1. It's very tempting to use longer screws on this because they don't look like they're long enough to hold it in place. Actually they are. If you ever strip them, then you'll need to drill them out and put a slightly larger one in, but don't be tempted to go longer, because you'll find if you go longer then the length will stick out and it will foul on the front differential or on the rear swing arm, and actually it stops it from working properly. So if you need to go bigger, go wider, not longer. There we are. So just to get so we can see what we're doing, that's now the front suspension in place, and you can see how the car's coming together already. But what we're going to do next is the middle drive belt retainer, okay, and that goes in here, and we're going to put that in place. So let's do that now, and once again that's 4 simple screws. So let's turn it over. This is always the fiddly bit because you've got to hold it in place, and I'll just make sure I've got my 4 screws for that. Here we are. I know I put them somewhere. 4 screws for that. So let's go for it and see what happens. 1, 2. Put those 2 in place just lightly, so it's held in place. And if I put the other 2 in, should cause a little bit of tension. There we are. A little bit of tension on the drive belt. Now at this point the front and the rear are still disconnected because there's a drive belt that goes between the front and the rear, which we'll need to put on, but I'm not going to do that just yet. We'll do that a little bit later on, simply because by putting that on, it can actually cause the chassis to flex, and then you can't get the rest of the components on. So we tend to do that last, so we don't pull the front and the rear together. But there we are. So that's in place, and you can see there we've got our central drive belt, and that's driving quite happily. Okay, there we are. Front and rear driving. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to put it in the picture. Front and rear driving quite happily. There we are. And then this one also will drive the rear. So this is the belt that's missing currently. We'll do that later on. So the next step in the rebuild is to put the steering mechanism in. Now this again just literally goes into position through the drive belt and screws in, this time using metric screws. Now this is quite important because very often, in fact almost every model I get back that needs repairing has used the standard self-tapping screws to hold the steering mechanism in, and what happens is they either break off or you can't get them out, or they start to wobble and they don't hold in properly. So most other plastic parts always use self-tapping screws. The steering components always use the metric screws. So just so I can show you the difference if you wish, let's see if I can find there we are, there's 2 differences, right? Okay, if you can see that, I don't know, if you can look at that carefully, you can see this one is the self-tapping screw with a much wider thread than this one, which is the metric screw. So it's always the metric screw that's used. Where did that come from? I don't remember now, I'll put it there for now. So it's always the metric screw that's used to go into metal, metric for metal if you like, and then the coarse thread goes into plastic. Oops, that was popped out for me. I'll just put the car upright so I can put that in place, and then I'll come back and show you. I'm just looking for the hole. There we are, and I'll come back and talk to you a little bit more. Come on, in you go. There we are, and it's found its slot. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it in my in-camera shot, am I? This is a bit difficult to see. Right, there we go. I do apologise for that. There. So that's now in position. Okay, and you can see there we've got our steering. So our steering mechanism, which is turned by this one here, is now left and right. I'm going to turn the camera up a little bit like that so that we get a better view of what we're doing. All I've got to do now is clip the track rods onto the ball bearings, ball joints, 1 and 2. We can do all the adjustments later on. There we are. 2. There we are. And so as we turn the steering, so the front end turns. So that's pretty much it for that stage. What I'll do now is we'll stop the video, and I'll come back and I'll do a second video, and we'll carry on from there. So we'll give it a break. Thank you very much for watching, and keep on watching.